This is basically a collaborative project between 3 organisations, but also really importantly also between at least 5 schools that we've had collaborating on this project. We've got at least 3 of those schools currently online, Twitter feeds open, trying to hopefully see that we get some comments on our hashtag as well. They've been very much part of this project from the absolute start, this ID15 project. And as we go through, and we'll take you through some of the qualitative kind of findings and also some of the neuroscience findings as well, just to say they've been absolutely involved in devising the methodology, being part of it and hearing the findings as well. We can talk you through that as we go. So, just so you know, because we're all fairly new, so Oxy Insight is a qualitative research agency that I head up. We do kids, we do adults, but essentially one of the things we really try and do is collaborations, and we collaborate hopefully with really interesting people from other organisations. So we've got Praedico, Dr. Erman Misirlisoy here is going to be speaking to you in a moment. So Erman is Praedico, partnership of neuroscientists applying academic level neuroscience in commercial contexts. And our very good friend Naomi Ward, who represents Connected, is not here because she is imminently giving birth. Hopefully not too imminently, but in about a week's time. She has an amazing organisation that's basically looking to kind of create collaborations between organisations and schools that are mutually beneficial, that are tied into curriculum goals and hopefully foster something really positive for young people and for businesses as well. What I'm going to do is play you a film. I'll just play you a couple of minutes. It just gives you an idea of what we actually did. We won't talk too much about that, and then we'll jump into the findings. It's really exciting because what we've tried to do is create a really interesting collaborative project where what we're trying to do is work with young people. So we've got this amazing opportunity to come into schools and work with young people and really get them to kind of steer the direction of the project. So from the very start, what we did is we did a Twitter debate, for example, and we gave the young people the core question, which was, what is online identity all about? And we kind of stepped back and just let them go for it, and we just saw what kind of interesting threads developed. We are working with Connected, which is headed up by Naomi Ward, and it's a company and an organisation that really looks to try and foster young people's sense of empowerment within school, their ability to do greater things, and they're doing that by collaborating with commercial organisations, for example. And we're also working with Erman and Peter from Praedico, who are a company of neuroscientists who are basically looking at bringing academic level neuroscience to the commercial context.
I think young people's really intelligent insight into the different groups of users within their peer group. This group interact in this way and these are their behaviours, and then you've got this group and you've got this group, and really that they are the experts on how that internet audience is segmented.
There's a style of experiment in neuroscience called subliminal priming or unconscious priming, and what we try to do is present words or concepts on the screen very fast so that you can't actually see it. So if we ask you, did you see that? You say no, but it can still affect your behaviour. And what we're interested in is how primes related to digital identity or physical identity affects how you relate information to yourself afterwards.
It was weird. I didn't really know what was going on, so I wasn't sure.
Well, it was quite interesting to see that my influence changed quite dramatically depending on the sequence of letters which flashed up very briefly. I didn't even get a chance to acknowledge what happened. To be honest, I have no idea what it stands for, but I think it might be something to do with how the internet or how online life, how it affects you and how you feel about it, and if it's a big impact on your life or if it's not.
We were asked to research what people are like online and offline, so the difference between them. What we came up with by talking to our peers and talking to each other is offline, we've noticed people are a lot more shy, because online you're kind of behind a screen and you can open up more.
A lot of the time you don't class yourself in your own stereotypical group. A lot of the time it's other people's perception that place you within a group.
What I will do is I'll take you through essentially the qualitative findings, and what I'm going to take you through are some of the key themes that came out. So we listened to young people, we talked to them about what does digital identity mean to you, and we listened to what came out and what was most important. One kind of, I think, important thing to say is in the context of talking about digital landscape and all these incredibly clever kind of capabilities and platforms and devices and whatever else, at the core there are some really basic human emotions that are driving why kids do what they do online. And I think that's probably one of the messages we're going to be kind of hopefully kind of bringing out here, is that these are just very real human needs and wants, and they're not actually massively dissimilar to the needs and wants that we all have in everyday life, in our physical lives. And then Erman's going to take you on and kind of explore that a bit more and understand how different are digital and physical identities, how different are those two identities, and do we need to kind of take notice of that. But on to these anyway. So validation. Validation was one of the first kind of key themes that came out. And there were kind of two different versions of it. The first one was what we are saying is affirmation. That's basically when young people put their digital identity out there over whatever platform it is, there is a real need that when they put themselves out there digitally, they need someone to go, yeah, all right, we see you, we know you're there. They need to be affirmed. They need someone, whether it's a brand, a friend, a person, an organisation, to acknowledge that they're there and their identity has been put out there. What's interesting is absolutely core to that is a response. If you put yourself out there and say hi to someone, whoever that hi is, you need that person to acknowledge that you are there, you've noticed that they're there, and there needs to be a response. I know on yesterday on the keynote speech there was a lot of talk about it not being a monologue. It has to be a two-way dialogue, and that's absolutely the same here. So when a young person goes out there digitally and says I'm here, they need to know that they've had a response back, and there's lots of ways of doing that. It's a way also of just kind of saying, you know, we know you're there. In the physical world, I come in and I probably smiled nervously when I kind of stood up, and I saw a few people at least smiling back. That's a way in our physical world of someone going, all right, I know you're there, I've got you, I'm on your side. And in the digital world, children need that same affirmation. Very simple, but it needs to happen. One of the other things, if you take it a little bit further, it's not only about affirming that you know those people are there, it's actually about going further and inviting them in and saying, we accept you, join us. That might be a brand, it might be a group of followers, it might be a community online, whatever it is. But the next stage is for you to actually kind of engage with them and invite them in. We had lots of nice examples that you can kind of look at later on of where people kind of stepped a bit further and tried to kind of break into new kind of groups online, got accepted and invited in, but they go to that next level. And the point is, this is just, again, this is really normal human stuff. You know, we are all hardwired to want to be part of communities. In the real world, we naturally gravitate back towards groups. We want to have a sense of belonging. You know, put a bunch of kids in a field and put like a fence around them, a perimeter. They will kind of dart around inside that perimeter and they'll play all over the place. Take that perimeter away, they will still kind of stay together, because you all need intrinsically to be part of something. And it's no different online. For all this cleverness about all the platforms, we need to feel we belong, and we need to make sure we're doing that for young people. So it's fundamental. We need to kind of affirm that we know that they're there. We need to show that we value the fact they are part of that digital landscape with us. And as I say, it's really important. These are basic human emotional needs that we need to acknowledge are important in the context of digital identity. The next thing that we heard and they told us about is the importance of taking risks with their digital identities. Again, we're hardwired. Neurologically, we are hardwired to want to always progress, to do better, to learn more. It's how we survive and progress as human beings. And part of that is taking risks. Also, if you go into any school context, you see that loads of people talk about risk-taking. In a lot of classrooms, there'll be a riskometer, you know, and little kiddies have to put their little face on whether they're taking risks today or not. Loads of kiddies we spoke to, like at 8, are talking about having a really positive growth mindset today, because they know that growth mindset is a really good thing. You know, but they are literally being brought up in a world where they know that taking risks is important. I don't think I grew up with that knowledge. I'm risk adverse, but they are not. And taking risks is a really important thing that they want to do with their digital identities. Essentially, it's about moving out of comfort zones, and there's so much these guys were speaking about as well that I kind of think it chimes, and you can see it all over the place, but it's young people being brave with their digital identities. You know, girls saying, you know, actually a year or two ago, I'd never have posted anything where I wasn't, you know, looking pretty perfect, but now they're going out of that, they're pushing out of that comfort zone, and they're posting Instagram photos of themselves without makeup or with a stupid face and looking a bit ugly and whatever else in their terms. They're taking risks with their visual identity. They're taking risks with what they say online. So again, they might have started off only ever posting stuff that they think their mates will kind of agree with, you know, but then actually, no, they're getting braver and they start taking risks with their digital identity. And most of the time it works out and it feels good to take risks because you build and you grow. So all good stuff, and again, all very core. Interesting, so we got Zoella up here as well, but absolutely in agreement with these guys from Discovery in the sense that when we ask people which online identities do you admire in others, the kind of people they kind of picked out, check these people out when you've got a chance because they're all really kind of cool, are people who are authentic, who show that they take risks, they mess up, they get things wrong. They are clearly quite a lot of them kind of good looking as well, unfortunately. They're all kind of stereotypically kind of attractive, but they are also people who just give it a go, take risks, get it wrong, get it right, but they keep on going. And those people are successful, and those are the people they admire. So the really big theme is this authenticity. Again, we heard about that at the keynote as well, but authenticity, and as the Discovery guys mentioned as well, is really, really important. They admire it and they want to emulate it. One of them, check this out, mentioned an ad. It's a Michael Jordan ad for Nike, which literally does nothing other than celebrate failure. That's all it does, because failure leads to trying again, which leads to eventually getting it right, which leads to success. And I think how cool, you know, 5-10 years ago that would not be something celebrated in an ad by Nike and by Michael Jordan, but that is what it is all about at the moment, risk taking as a means of progressing. So very important to encourage and enable young people to take risks. In the interest of time, I will not dwell. The last one is the kind of almost the pinnacle, the culmination of this is this kind of the creative space. And two things to say about this is, one, the creative space that people can reach with their digital identity is a great space for us as marketeers to be able to look in on, because there is some amazing stuff that they create. You know, there's amazing thinking, there's amazing content they can contribute to, whether it's, I don't know, creative development or thinking brilliantly. It's an amazing space in itself. But importantly, it is a space that make young people feel great. When young people are enabled to be creative fully, it's really, really life-affirming. It's stuff we need to be doing. The kind of stuff they were talking about, again, similar in theme to the other guys, is this notion of kind of moving from just consuming stuff online to actually creating stuff online. There's lots of examples of that where people go from just kind of consuming to actually starting to create their own thing, and it really gives them a great sense of self-worth. It enables them to be brave and to produce stuff. Something we didn't put on here because we only heard it yesterday, but from the keynote speech I think was interesting in the sense that the guys from Vsauce were saying how you can actually share other people's creations online, and by doing that you are in some way building up your own identity. So clearly I did that yesterday to try and make myself look better by sharing his content. But I think it's not only creating your own content, but it's by sharing other content you build this greater sense of who you are and your digital identity. Really, really important things to foster. A couple of quick insights from the kind of educational sphere are that creativity really needs support, and we can all do this in different ways regardless of whether we're a brand or an organisation, a charity or whatever else. But for kids to be truly creative, if they are supported, if there is co-creation happening, peer evaluation, if we're talking in the context of education, that's when creativity can become amazing. Check out Austin's Butterfly when you have a chance. Basically the tale of a little 5-year-old kiddie who was asked to draw a butterfly, and when he was doing it on his own, it was a pretty mediocre butterfly, so it was all right, but it wasn't fantastic. Through a process of peer evaluation, of co-creation, of mentoring by teachers, peers kind of suggesting what he should and shouldn't do, he did a cracking butterfly by the end of it. He still drew it, no one helped him, but it's the point that creativity, when it's part of a co-creative kind of process, gets to really amazing spaces, and we want to kind of hopefully help all kids create cracking butterflies, as it were. And check out when you have time as well. UMedia is an interesting one, as in it's a sort of conglomeration of libraries in Chicago. But again, it's something that is very big in the educational sphere, and is a really nice example of basically creating a digital and physical space that encourages children to kind of co-create not only with mentors but with their peers, and they are creating amazing things in terms of output, but it is also creating a wonderful wave of sort of positivity for them and those that are involved. But just a nice little example. So, just about in time, I think, Erman. Just wrapping up. So what we've got here is key. These things are really key, and they're really fundamental human needs. As I say, for all the talk of very clever platforms and whatever else, what's driving young people's engagement in terms of their digital identity are very natural human core needs, as it were. But one of our questions was, how important is this to young people? So just before I hand over to Erman, what we're going to go through now is exploring what the impact of this digital identity is. Just so you know where we're going with this, is we wondered, okay, so all these things are all very interesting, etc., but do they actually really mean anything? Is it all going to change? You know, how fundamental is children's digital identity to who they think they are? And the reason we think that's important is because actually, you know, if it's really, really important, if one child, if we're talking to, say, Josh, who's 12, we're creating content from him, or we're engaging with him, you know, what if Josh, who's 12, is fundamentally a different person offline than he is online? Because if he is, then we need to be talking to him differently offline than we do online. And we need to he's going to have different needs online versus offline. Erman's going to tell you about sort of whether people think they're different online and offline and whether those identities are different. But we kind of explored it with neuroscience and found out some interesting stuff.
So yeah, what neuroscience offers is an insight into the unconscious. And it's also a way of directly measuring behaviour. So qualitative research is really important, and we've seen some of the great insights from the Discovery people and also Sonia. But often people don't behave in ways that they say they do or think they do. So neuroscience offers this way into analysing people's behaviour more directly, and it's a nice complement to the more traditional qualitative approach. So if you ask people qualitatively, like we did, do they think they're different people online versus offline? 60% of them said no. So this is at the conscious level. But the question is whether we can use neuroscience to find a deeper level differences that people weren't aware of in the first place. So we ran 2 experiments on this particular project, and the first one was looking at this question of whether people differ in their personalities, and we did this by using a very standard questionnaire from experimental psychology, and this measures personality. So it analyzes this very well-known series of 5 personality traits known as the Big 5. These are openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And these are known to be very robust, so you're typically born with them, and they're maintained across the lifespan. And you can run these questionnaires again and again with people with slightly different questions, and you generally get the same results. But we wanted to apply it in a quite novel way, because we didn't want to assume that people have just one self, like it's just one thing inside you. There's very good reason to think that we might have multiple selves and with different people in different circumstances. So 2 types of self that we might have is our digital self and our physical self. So what we did is we took this questionnaire, we gave it to people in person to fill out, which is the traditional way to do it, and then we gave them practically the same questionnaire, and we gave it to them online as well. So the idea was we stimulate their physical self, their in-person self, and they could complete the questionnaire. Then we stimulate their digital self and get them to do the same thing. And if we find differences, it might be interesting to look at what those differences are and maybe find out a lot about our digital identity. So what do we find? So I'm going to give you a spoiler now, which is that yes, there are differences. Okay, but at this stage, it's important to think about the fact that earlier people at a conscious level were saying, no, we don't differ. So when you do get to this lower level, as you can do with neuroscience, then you start to pick up certain differences and you can analyse them. So just to go into the specifics. So this graph is showing you the 5 personality traits. Each of them has their own line. And along the horizontal axis on that graph, the x-axis, you see how long people spend daily on social networks. And these were Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And 8 hours is a long time actually, but people were reporting spending this amount of time online every day. And along the other axis, the vertical one, what you have is how strong each of those traits is in your digital identity versus your physical identity. So if it's a flat line, that basically just means there's no difference between the 2. You're the same person online and offline, no matter how long you spend online. But if there's a slope to it, then you're finding a difference. So if you look, there's a positive slope with extroversion. What that means is that people become more confident and more extroverted with their digital selves than their physical selves as they spend more time online. So this actually, even on an intuitive level for me, makes sense. So this is something I predicted because, as a younger person, I was really shy in person. I'd say nothing, but then on MSN Messenger or whatever I was using back then, I was much more talkative. So this was nice. And in fact, the 40% of people who, when we asked them consciously, reported being maybe slightly different, almost all of them were referring to this confidence thing. They were saying, I'm more extroverted, I'm a little bit more crazy online. So that was nice to find. But you've also got some negative slopes. So neuroticism, people are less neurotic in their digital selves than their physical selves as they spend more time online. So this basically means they're less emotionally unstable. So they feel just more comfortable, they're less anxious, they're just much happier in this digital world where they can express their digital self. And this might have something to do with the fact that you don't have your physical identity open to people. So it's not based on appearance anymore, which is nice. And conscientiousness was a surprising one. So people are less conscientious online versus offline. And this might just be because it's less important to be conscientious. So there are fewer rules on the internet to follow, and you don't have to be so disciplined. And that might be why this is coming out. But basically the important thing is just that the more time you spend online, the bigger the disparity becomes between your digital self and your physical self. These aren't the same thing. They do seem to differ in these interesting ways. And we are spending more of our time online. So we're effectively moving our lives into the digital world now. And actually there's some really cool evidence showing that even the way our memories are structured and the way they're organized is changing as we spend more time online in a way that basically you might not, so you don't remember the content of information, but you remember where you can find it. So people tend to not remember that an ostrich's eye is bigger than its brain, but they remember, oh, I can find that on Google. So we remember where information is, but not we're less effective at remembering what it is. So what we need to do is have approaches that can target these different selves. So just as an example, if you're a marketer or a content developer and you're interested in what should we focus on with people, what kind of emotions should we target if we're dealing with their physical selves, then you might not want to focus too much on confidence because people have less of that with their physical self. Whereas if you're dealing with an online identity, that might be a much more effective way to progress. So that's just an example, but lots of these insights can come out of these kinds of neuroscientific methods. So there was one other variable that I looked at, which is not how long you spend online, but how many followers you have. So we also asked people how many followers do you have on Instagram, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. And I'm plotting exactly the same graph, but this time it's just how many followers on the bottom axis. And you find that the one thing that pops out here is openness. So people become less open in their personality as they gain more followers on these social networks. So they become less imaginative and less risk-taking, which I found a bit counterintuitive. It seems a bit bizarre that should happen, but it kind of harks back to what Sonia was saying about risk-taking and creativity are important when you're trying to gain followers and you're developing an identity. But once you have this big follower base, it might be more sensible to not take risks because then you risk losing them, right? So you sort of stick to your niche that you've developed and not take risks. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing necessarily. It could be a good thing. But the point is we need to think about it, and if you're trying to foster creativity and you're trying to foster imagination, then what you want to do is create a smaller space. And you want to take the focus off of gain as many followers as you can to be successful online, because that's a way to reduce those things that you're interested in. So these are just ways you can use the data to inform real-world practical interventions. So that data shows that our digital identity is different to our physical identity, but we don't know much about how deep that digital identity really goes. So are people just entering a new mode when they're on the computer, which is just some superficial thing? Or is it a really deep part of us? Is it like entering our unconscious in a way? So we wanted to study that with this experiment. And this uses something called unconscious priming. And what this aims to do is present information to you unconsciously. So you can't actually register it, but it can still affect your behavior. So as we walk around in our everyday lives, most of the information we're presented with is totally unconscious. We never become aware of it, but it still affects how we behave. So lots of people are kind of sitting, twiddling their thumbs or playing with their hair, and you're not necessarily aware of that happening. It's just something that you're doing, right? It's just you're not aware of it, it just happens. And that's the kind of world we want to get into, because it's such a big part of us. So we're interested in using these priming signals associated with digital identity and physical identity, and compare the effects they have on you and how you behave. So bear with me as I explain this, and if it's not clear, please stop me. But basically, we just flash a word on the screen very, very fast, so it's on a scale of a few tens of milliseconds. And if you ask people, what did you just see on the screen, they say, oh, I just saw a flash or a random stream of letters. But actually, under that random stream of letters, we had these words popping up. And there were three types of word we presented to people. One of them were digital primes, So this could be the word Facebook or the word Instagram. Another group of physical identity primes, so this could be gender or ethnicity, that's your physical self. And the other ones were just neutral, so we wanted a kind of baseline, and that's just presenting the word neutral. And what we did was each time we presented these primes, we asked people a very boring question, which was very repetitive, but it was supposed to be. And what it is how much does this colour on the screen relate to you as a person right now? So we're trying to bring out their sense of self and measure how relevant they think their sense of self is at that moment, depending on what we previously presented to them. Does that make sense? So the idea is if we ask people, oh, how do you feel about the colour red right now? And we had a neutral prime before that, they might say, oh, it doesn't really relate to me, I don't like it so much. But if we present that same colour, ask them the same question, and present a physical identity prime like ethnicity, then we might stimulate their sense of self for them to think, oh, actually, yeah, this really relates to me now, actually. And then so we're just measuring the sense of self by using these different primes, and we can compare how strong they are as an idea about which identity is strongest and how they kind of measure up against each other. So the results look like this. So what you have, again, you have, similar to the previous graph, how long people spend online, but this time is the strength of each identity. And strength just means how well these primes did in actually affecting you and changing your behavior and changing how much you rate these colors as relating to you. So the physical line is quite flat, which basically means that the more time you spend online, it doesn't make a difference to your physical identity. And that kind of makes sense. There's no reason that it should. So you're the same person physically, no matter how much you use the internet. But the digital primes were having this quite interesting effect where as you spend more time online, these digital primes become much more effective in changing you unconsciously and affecting how you behave. So if you spent 7 and over hours online, actually, then you see the lines start to cross over, which is probably the most exciting thing that I could find, which is that your digital identity might even be overtaking your physical identity as being a primary driving force in your character. So people's digital identity is more important to them than their physical identity. And physical identity is something we're born with, and we carry it around with us everywhere. So I find it really nice and surprising that digital identity can overtake it as this primary driving force. And again, it suggests that this digital identity goes very deep. It's not just something superficial that we kind of switch on and switch off. We start being affected by it very directly and in unconscious ways. So I'll leave it to Sonia to summarise.
So where this leaves us is, first of all, as I say, just to go back to what we found out qualitatively, is that, as I say, despite all of the technology and the platforms, etc., in regard to the digital landscape, there are very human base kind of emotions that are driving young people's interactions and behaviours in the digital context. We mustn't forget those. We mustn't forget to acknowledge those and engage with those. But as Erman said, digital identity is clearly impacting on personalities, creating divergent personalities in the young people we are trying to engage with. That is a fact, it seems, and we need to understand that and think, how does that impact on how we engage, what we say to them, our tone of voice or whatever. But they do seem to have definitely different personalities online versus online at quite a fundamental level. And then really important, as Erman said, the reality is lives are going to move online more, there is no doubt about that, and we are already seeing digital identity overtaking physical identity in terms of the driving force in young people's sense of who they are. So if that's the case, in 5 years' time, which identity should we be talking to? Are we talking to their digital identity? Are we talking to their physical identity? I don't know, but I just know it's something we need to think about, and that's kind of just what we wanted to bring to life. Is it's our job to work out what does this all mean, because the reality is those two personalities are going the way that they are going, so we now need to think, how does that impact on what we do and how we speak to those young people. And that is it.
Sounds absolutely terrifying, actually. It sounds like we're sort of breeding a whole army of schizophrenic people, you know? I think it's one of the most alarming bits of information I've ever listened to, actually.
Which part specifically?
Well, the fact is that you don't know if your child is you're talking to the digital child or the human child, and you seem to feel that the digital it's exciting when the digital takes over the normal child.
Yeah.
I wondered why you thought it was exciting. It seems a terrible thought to me, but
Yeah, so
when I think of my grandchildren, I won't know who I'm talking to.
Yeah. Yes, I'm not so pessimistic or scared by it, because things change all the time, and I'm kind of making this dichotomy between two selves, but they're still us, right? No matter what it is, it's still us. So the digital self is still us. It's just we're interacting in this completely new domain that's new to us. So when literature was invented, we have our self develops very quickly, right? So you suddenly start reading novels and books, and you enter this completely new world. And people were terrified of that too when it happened, but it's not all that scary. And in fact, we develop in ways that often we can't anticipate, but usually we develop for the better. And I personally think digital identity isn't a scary thing. It's just a new part of us that's developing, and we should make the most of it.
I have to say as well, what I actually found, because I have a natural aversion to digital. It's just not something I really kind of buy into personally. But I found it actually really heartwarming to kind of understand that what's driving all that digital interaction and behaviour is still really important, full of value stuff. It's really core human needs and wants. And actually all we've got to do is just cope with that digital context to carry on feeding young people in really positive ways. They are still the same young people. Yeah. They still have needs that are about belonging and feeling self-worth and really great, amazing things. We just need to understand how to do that in the digital context. But I know what you mean. It is a bit like, whoa, it's a bit kind of, But it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, I feel digital isn't less human. I don't think the two go together, for me personally anyway. Because, we're still being just as social online, in fact, maybe even more social. So we still have all these human traits that we're fulfilling. We're just fulfilling them in this completely new medium that we've very recently come across. But it'd be interesting to see how it all develops in the future as well.
I just have one question. You were saying which are we going to look more at, the digital or the real? But the reality is the digital life leaves a data trail. It's never erased. So it's lazy and easy to look at the digital, because actually looking at the real person is really hard and complicated, especially with kids. So we're going to be seduced into looking at the digital because we think we get a rich picture of data, but of course it's not as rich as what's going on in someone's head, but we're getting seduced. So working in radio, radio producers don't get overnight figures, they get quarterly figures every quarter of the year. So they get seduced into looking at Twitter because they think it's an instant picture of their audience, but it's an instant picture of 10% of their audience. So I was wondering, are we going to just get seduced into the digital, to looking at digital personality because it's easy?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, purely because the remit and what we wanted to explore was digital identity, so clearly we've just done that. But I think you're absolutely right. But I think what makes me feel a bit like, whoa, kind of confused, is the fact that they are so different. Because you're right, you cannot exclude the physical identity and everything that comes with it, because that is where the real richness is probably lies. So, but I think what's really interesting is to think, well, but if they are so divergent, and the reality is we are going to try and engage with people in these kind of digital contexts, like it's just something I think we've got to face up to and think, well, how are we going to relate? But I think you're right, there's no way that should, even though it's becoming more of the driving force in their sense of self, we can't therefore switch to only communicating and engaging with them in that sphere. It's kind of one of those presentations that raises more questions than it answers, possibly, which wasn't kind of the intention, but it was just a thought piece, and I think that's a really relevant question.
And I agree that the digital self is more of a snapshot than our real self, and people can choose what they want to broadcast to people. But again, I'm not sure is that about. I mean, we all want to do that in the real world too.
Present ourselves in the real world.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's a little bit. It's just
schizophrenia. We had a school. We were growing up. We had a school self. You behaved in the school. You had a home self. And you had an angry mates in the park self, and they were all slightly different.
I think that's what I like, the fact that at least we know there are different selves, and to me I didn't know they were kind of different in this way. That's cool, we know, now we'll deal with it. Do you know what I mean? It's just what happens, but knowing is, knowledge is power.
Okay, and one thing I should say, just to make it less scary, so with these personality things, when we measure them digital and physical, when you look at the correlations, you find these interesting differences, but if you look at just the overall patterns with no correlation, so you just look at someone's personality online, someone's personality offline in the real world, they're very, very similar. So overall, these personalities are similar. You're not just transformed into a completely new person. So you're still the same person in that sense, but you just have these subtleties where you become more confident, or you become less worried and less neurotic. So there are just these subtle differences which aren't always a bad thing.
Thank you very much. It's a very, very interesting presentation. It's more of a continuation of the previous question, which is, did you look at much at the nuances within the digital identity? So, for example, Instagram is seen as quite a public-facing service. Facebook was seen as like the public-facing, so a lot of teenagers kind of fled and went to WhatsApp, like the benefit of WhatsApp being it's a controlled group where you just speak to your friends. Same with things like Snapchat, it's very more personalised. Was there any kind of findings within that?
Within the neuroscience side, no. So we were looking at this kind of, neuroscience has this tendency to look at global things, right, and try to find universals for people. But it'd be really interesting to try and look separately at those primes that we had, so Facebook versus Instagram, and see if there are differences there. But we haven't tried that, it's a good question.
But that's the brief we're waiting for, when it's not self-funded, so if anyone wants that, we'll do that.
One thing I noticed was about the openness, which seemed about the only negative thing. The reduction in neuroticism is great, and increased confidence is great, but reduction in openness is not so great, is it? So, what I think that's an interesting thing that's thrown up. That to me would be the one thing that to explore, to see what's driving that. Is that inexorable, or?
So openness, I always find a really interesting word because it's huge. Like, it's such a big word, and we have traits that are within openness. You have creativity and imagination, and those are good things. You don't necessarily want to lose those, like you say. But then you have stuff like risk taking, and risk taking isn't always a good thing. Right? Sometimes it's good to mellow down a bit. So, and again, you see, so when people have these followers, lots of followers, they just perceive that it might be dysfunctional to be still taking risks. So again, people are just sort of adapting to these new settings that they face, and it's not necessarily that they lose their imagination forever. It's just that the environment that they're now in is different, and they want to restrict what they're creating and restrict this kind of completely these new risks that they're taking, so that they maintain this high follower base that makes them happy.
But to the point as well, if it is negative, and if there is something there that is indicating that it's impacting on their ability to be open, then that's what we've got to write. That's the challenge we need to face, because we can't let that carry on, because that's not good. People, we need to understand how can we create an environment, a forum where people can, young people can be open and express it.
About creating a smaller environment.
You'd imagine
that seems to be the
one that's
message.
less focused on gaining followers. So the key success signal at the moment for online identity is have lots of followers. If you remove that as a success signal, then you might foster this more healthy environment. We have to stop there.